I spent my whole life building a family business. Not for me but for my children. I gave them everything. Money, education, a future already laid out. But when it was time for them to step up, they betrayed me. They turned their backs, laughed at my sacrifices, and treated me like a burden. So, I made a choice they never saw coming. I handed their inheritance, their jobs, their future, over to complete strangers. And let me tell you, I don't regret it one bit. Get ready, because what you're about to hear is not just a story, it's a reckoning. Comment below where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. My name is Margaret Hollis, though everyone in Charleston just calls me Maggie. I am 68 years old, and if you walk down the waterfront near Market Street, you might catch the smell of shrimp and hush puppies drifting through the air. That's my doing. For more than 3 decades, I poured my heart and soul into a little place called Hollis Seafood House. It wasn't just a restaurant to me. It was my husband's dream before he passed, and it was my lifeline after he was gone. I worked every shift, scraped every pot, and shook hands with every fisherman at the docks. I wasn't trying to build an empire. I wasn't trying to make myself rich. I was trying to carve out a future for my children, David and Claire. When they were little, I'd bring them to the diner early in the morning. David would sit on the counter, swinging his legs while I chopped onions. Claire would fold napkins into triangles while humming to herself. I told myself one day they won't just be children hanging around their mama's kitchen. One day this place will belong to them. That was my whole reason for working so hard. Every penny I saved, every sleepless night I endured, every loan I paid off. It was all so that my son and daughter could step into something steady, something built, something that would carry them further than I ever dreamed. I gave them everything. When David wanted to study business at the University of South Carolina, I paid the tuition in full. When Claire said she wanted to try accounting, I covered the books, the laptop, the textbooks that seemed to cost more than gold. I even helped Claire and her husband Mark buy their first house, signed my name on a loan to give them a foothold. And when David struggled to keep up with his bills, I handed him the keys to one of my rental apartments and told him not to worry about rent for a while. I thought all this giving, this endless pouring out, would mean that one day when it was time they would step in with gratitude. I imagined the two of them working side by side in the restaurant, bringing in new ideas, while I finally sat on the porch with a glass of sweet tea, proud and at peace. I was wrong. The truth is, children don't always grow up the way you think they will. You can teach them to fish, you can show them how to pray, you can put food on their table every single night. And still, something can twist inside of them when it comes to power and inheritance. I should have noticed earlier. David's careless way of stumbling into work late, his excuses about networking when I knew he'd been at the bar. Claire's sharp tone when she handled the books as if she were the owner already. Mark, her husband, making jokes to my face about cashing out the restaurant once I was too tired to fry shrimp anymore. Little signs, little cracks, but I brushed them off, because in my heart I still believed blood would never betray me. Until one day they did. They didn't just betray me, they humiliated me. They laughed at my sacrifices. They treated me like a burden, like an old woman in the way. They forgot every dollar, every hour, every sacrifice that built the roof over their heads. And that is why I'm here telling this story. Because what I thought was theirs by inheritance, the business, the jobs, the future, I realized it wasn't their right. It was mine to give, and I still held that power. So when they tried to push me out, when they tried to write me off like a line item on a balance sheet, I made a decision that changed everything. I didn't hand the future to them. I handed it to strangers. Strangers who respected me. Strangers who earned it. Strangers who looked at me not as a burden but as a guide. It may sound harsh, but at 68 you learn something. The people who betray you don't deserve the keys to your kingdom. This is the story of how I gave my children everything, and how, in the end, I took it all back. When my husband John passed away, I thought my world had ended. He was only 55, taken too soon by a sudden heart attack, and there I was, a widow with 2 young adults still depending on me, a mountain of bills, and a restaurant that barely broke even. I could have sold Hollis Seafood House. In fact, more than one developer came knocking, offering to buy the dock lease so they could put up condos or a tourist shop. But I shook my head every time. That restaurant wasn't just a business. It was my husband's legacy, and it was the one thing I could still hold on to that carried his spirit. I wasn't going to let it go no matter how heavy it got. So I rolled up my sleeves. I learned how to gut fish faster than the boys at the dock. I trained myself to work the fryer, the register, and the books, often all in one day. I did catering jobs on weekends, and when the restaurant lights went dark at midnight, I would still be up mopping the floors. And through all of it, I kept telling myself, this isn't just for me. This is for David. This is for Claire. This is their future. I made sure they never wanted for anything. When David decided he wanted to study business at the University of South Carolina, I sold my wedding ring to help cover tuition. When Claire came to me saying she wanted to take accounting classes, I dipped into the restaurant savings account. I thought if they learn these skills, they'll come back and use them for the family business. It'll all pay off one day. When David graduated, I gave him the title of general manager, even though I still did most of the managing myself. I wanted him to feel proud, to feel like he had a stake. When Claire married Mark and needed help with a down payment on their house, I co-signed a loan and pulled from my retirement savings. I told myself it was an investment, not in property but in family. And for a while I believed everything was working the way it was supposed to. The restaurant grew. We went from being a little crab shack on the dock to a well-known seafood house where locals and tourists lined up for hush puppies and gumbo. We expanded the menu, we expanded the dining area, and eventually we expanded into catering weddings and events. But beneath the growth, the cracks started to show. David had a habit of stumbling into work late. I'd find him in the office, his shirt wrinkled, his breath heavy with last night's whiskey. He'd wave me off, saying, "Relax, Mom, I was networking at the bar. You want connections in this business, don't you?" But all I saw was a boy who wanted the title without the work. Claire, on the other hand, grew sharp with me whenever I asked about the books. She'd roll her eyes and say things like, "Mom, you just don't get modern accounting. Let me handle it." At first I was relieved, less paperwork for me, but then I started noticing little inconsistencies. Payments to vendors I'd never heard of, expenses that didn't line up with our orders. When I asked about them, she said I was just confused, that maybe I was getting forgetful. And then there was Mark. Mark liked to hang around the restaurant even though he didn't officially work there. He'd sit at the bar sipping a beer, making jokes with the staff. At first I didn't mind. Family was family after all, but his jokes grew sharper, meaner. "One day," he said once, right in front of me, "we'll cash out this place and move to Florida. Can't live on fried shrimp forever." Everyone laughed nervously, but I felt the sting of it deep in my chest. I should have confronted them right then. I should have laid down the law, reminded them that this wasn't just some business they could flip and sell. But instead I stayed quiet. I told myself they were just young, just careless, and that with time they'd grow into the responsibility. Besides, I was tired. Running a restaurant takes a toll on the body. Your back aches, your feet swell, your eyes blur from staring at orders all day. At 68, I didn't have the fight in me that I once did. So I let things slide, hoping love would cover the cracks that were starting to form. Looking back now, I see those moments for what they were: warnings. Warnings that my children were no longer looking at Hollis Seafood House as a legacy to cherish, but as a prize to claim. And yet, in my heart, I still believed they would never betray me. It was a Saturday morning, one of our busiest days of the week. The kind of morning where the smell of hush puppies and fried catfish clung to the air before the doors even opened, and a line of regulars waited outside, ready for their first plate. I had just finished greeting Mr. Hawkins, one of our fishermen who brought in fresh shrimp from his boat, when I noticed something strange. Taped to the glass door was a sign, big black letters on white paper. Under new management, Hollis Seafood rebranded. I froze. My heart skipped. At first I thought it must have been some kind of joke. Maybe one of the waitresses trying to get a laugh. But as I stepped inside, the staff weren't laughing. They were standing awkwardly around the counter, whispering to each other. The cooks kept glancing at me like I didn't belong there. And then I saw him, my son David. He was standing at the center of the dining room holding a clipboard like some kind of boss. His shirt was untucked, his eyes bloodshot, but he wore a grin like he had finally won something. My daughter Claire stood beside him, her hair tied back, dressed sharply as though she were hosting a press conference instead of a Saturday rush. Mark, her husband, lingered near the counter with that smug half-smile he always wore when he thought he was clever. David cleared his throat and clapped his hands. "All right, everyone," he said, raising his voice loud enough for the customers at the door to hear. "I want to make it official. Starting today, Hollis Seafood House will be under new management. My sister and I have decided it's time for Mom to retire." The room went silent. I felt the words cut me sharp and fast. Retire? Retire? No one had ever asked me if I wanted that. No one had spoken to me about this so-called change. Yet here he was, announcing it like it was a promotion in the Sunday paper. "Retire," I said, my voice trembling. "David, what are you talking about? This is my restaurant. Our restaurant." Claire stepped forward, her expression cool and calculated. "Mom, we've talked about this. You've been running yourself ragged. It's time for you to step aside and let us modernize things. You can finally relax. Enjoy yourself." Talked about this? I could hardly believe the gall. The only talk we'd ever had was me begging them to take more responsibility, not less. I looked to the staff, my loyal cooks and waitresses who had been with me for years, searching for someone to stand with me. But they looked down, uncomfortable, not wanting to be caught in the middle. Then Mark stepped forward, a manila folder in his hands. He flipped it open like he was in court, not a family restaurant. "We've got all the paperwork right here," he said smoothly. "Power of attorney. Signed by you last year before your hip surgery. You remember, don't you? You said you trusted Claire to take care of things if you couldn't." My stomach dropped. I remembered that day, lying in the hospital bed, nervous about the surgery, not wanting to deal with legal jargon. Claire had slipped the papers in front of me and said, "It's just for the hospital, Mom. In case of emergencies." And now here it was, used as a weapon against me. Mark smirked. "We used that to take out a business loan. It's time to modernize, bring in investors. You wouldn't understand the changes, but trust us, it's better this way." I felt the blood rush to my face, humiliation burning hotter than the fryers in the kitchen. They had stolen my name, my signature, my trust, and turned it into chains to push me out of the very place I had built with my bare hands. "Give me my keys," I demanded, my voice shaking but firm. David chuckled, pulling a ring of keys from his pocket and twirling it on his finger. "Sorry, Mom. You'll just confuse the lunch rush if you're back here. Why don't you go home and rest? We've got it handled now." The cooks shifted uneasily. One of the waitresses started to cry quietly in the corner. Customers at the door turned away, sensing the chaos inside. And I stood there, my hands trembling, my chest tight, realizing that my own children had just thrown me out of my life's work. It wasn't just betrayal. It was humiliation. In front of my staff. In front of strangers. In front of the very walls that had heard my husband's laughter and my children's cries when they were little. I wanted to scream, to fight, to throw the papers in Mark's smug face. But the weight of it all pressed down on me so hard that my body refused to move. I felt like I was drowning in plain sight, while my own children held my head under the water. That was the moment I knew the future I had built for them was not safe in their hands. I don't remember the drive home that day. I only remember the sound of the seagulls fading behind me and the way my hands shook on the steering wheel. I had walked into my restaurant full of pride that morning, and I left stripped of everything. My own children had stood in front of my staff, in front of my community, and told me I was done. When I got back to my little house off Meeting Street, I sat in the car for a long time. The engine ticked as it cooled, and the world outside kept moving. neighbors walking dogs, a boy tossing a basketball against the curb. But inside that car I was frozen. Finally, I forced myself inside. I dropped my purse on the kitchen table, sat down in my chair and stared at the walls. That's when I realized I hadn't eaten all day. I pulled out my debit card to order some groceries online, but when I entered the number, the screen flashed red. Declined. At first, I thought maybe it was a mistake. I tried again. Declined. I opened my banking app and my chest tightened. The business account was empty. Completely drained. The savings I had worked decades to build was gone, funneled into whatever modernization scheme my children and Mark had cooked up. I dropped the phone on the table and pressed my hands against my face. My head pounded, my chest ached, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly alone. I thought about calling someone, maybe my sister in Greenville, maybe a friend from church. But what would I say? That my own children had stolen from me? That they'd left me sitting here without a dollar to my name, without even the dignity of my own restaurant? I couldn't bring myself to let the words leave my mouth. That night I couldn't sleep. I tossed in bed, the ceiling fan clicking above me, my heart heavy. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw David twirling my keys like a trophy, Claire looking at me with that cold, calculating face, Mark waving those papers. I heard their laughter, their dismissive voices, telling me I was finished. The next morning I went digging. I pulled out the old fireproof box from my closet, the one I hadn't opened in years. Inside were folders and envelopes, all the documents I'd kept over the decades. I started thumbing through them, not even sure what I was looking for. Maybe I just needed to see something that still had my name on it. And that's when I found it. First, the business license, renewed year after year, always signed by me, never once transferred. My name was still the only one listed as owner. Then, tucked inside an old recipe book, I found the copyright registration papers I'd filed years ago at John's urging. All the recipes, from the hush puppies to the crab stew, were legally mine. I remembered how John had laughed back then, saying, "One day you'll be glad we did this." And at the very bottom of the box, wrapped in a yellowing envelope, was the dock lease. 30 years ago, when we'd expanded from the crab shack, we signed a long-term lease for the waterfront property. I flipped through the pages, my hands shaking. There it was, in black and white, a clause stating that no assignment or rebranding could happen without the landlord's written consent. And that consent required my signature. I sat there for a long time, staring at those documents. My children had taken my trust and used it against me. They had drained my accounts, humiliated me, and told me I was nothing. But in their arrogance, they had overlooked the very foundation of the business. The name, the recipes, the property, all of it was still tethered to me. For the first time since that terrible day, I felt something stir inside me. A small spark, faint but steady. Hope. Power. I slipped the papers back into the box, closed the lid, and pressed my hand against it. They thought they had cut me out. They thought they had written me off. But what they didn't know was that I still had one last card to play. And when the time was right, I was going to play it. The morning after I discovered those documents, I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. My body still ached, my heart still stung, but my mind was clear. My children thought they had won. They thought they had pushed me into a corner. But I knew better. Corners can be places of defeat, or places where you gather your strength before stepping back into the fight. I started with the dock lease. I dialed the number for Mr. Jenkins, the landlord who had overseen our property for as long as I could remember. He was older now, like me, but his voice was still strong on the phone. "Maggie," he said, surprised. "I was wondering when you'd call. I heard something happened down at the restaurant." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "You heard right," I said. "David and Claire are trying to run it without me. But they don't have the authority, do they?" He chuckled, low and steady. "Not unless you gave it to them, and last time I checked, the only signature I care about is yours." Relief swept through me. That was one piece of the puzzle secured. Next, I called Caroline Ruiz, a young lawyer recommended by a friend at church. She met me at her office that same afternoon. I laid out the documents, the business license, the recipe copyrights, the doc lease, and told her everything. Caroline flipped through the papers carefully, nodding as she read. Mrs. Hollis, this is stronger than you think. Your children may have tried to stage a takeover, but legally they've left themselves exposed. You still hold the business license, the intellectual property, and the lease. They're operating under your name without your permission. That's grounds for a cease and desist. Her words steadied me. For the first time since the betrayal, I felt like I had a shield in my hands. Don't act too fast, Caroline warned. We'll need to prepare the filings, make sure everything is airtight. In the meantime, keep this quiet. Don't let them know what you're planning. I nodded. Keeping quiet had never been my strong suit, but this time I understood the value of silence. Let them think I was beaten. Let them laugh behind closed doors. Every day they believed I was powerless only made my return stronger. Still, a restaurant isn't just paperwork. It's people. If I wanted to reclaim Hollis Seafood House, I needed a team. And this time I wasn't going to hand the jobs to family who hadn't earned them. So I started looking elsewhere. Through the Veterans Community Center, I met James, a former Navy cook who had been struggling to find steady work after leaving the service. He had discipline in his eyes and a steady hand when he chopped vegetables. Then there was Elena, a pastry chef from Santa Fe who had moved east after her bakery closed during the pandemic. She carried her portfolio of desserts like a badge of honor, each photograph showing a creation more beautiful than the last. I interviewed them quietly, never once mentioning my children. I told them I was looking for help with a project. What I didn't say was that the project was my life's work. They impressed me not just with their skills but with their humility. They listened when I spoke. They respected the recipes. They didn't roll their eyes or tell me I was too old to understand. For the first time in years, I felt what it was like to be surrounded by people who valued me. Piece by piece the plan came together. Caroline worked on the legal filings. Mr. Jenkins assured me no one could use the property without my say. James and Elena began training quietly in my kitchen at home, running through recipes late at night while I stood by the stove, coaching them like I once coached my own children. I stayed silent in public. When neighbors asked about the restaurant, I smiled and said, "Oh, the kids are handling things." When church friends asked if I was enjoying retirement, I laughed softly and said, "Something like that." But inside I was waiting for the moment to strike. And as I waited, I watched. I drove past the restaurant on busy evenings. The parking lot was half empty, the windows dark when they should have been glowing. Word spread of bad reviews, of spoiled food, of staff walking out mid-shift. My children were running my legacy into the ground, and the community was watching. That was when I knew the timing would be perfect. Let them dig the hole deeper. Let them taste the bitterness of failure. And when the moment was right, I would step forward. Not defeated, not broken, but ready. They thought I had given them everything. But what I was really doing was taking it all back. The week after I met with Mr. Jenkins and Caroline, I kept my routine quiet and simple. Mornings I walked the waterfront, counting the boats easing in and out of the marina. Afternoons I cooked at home with James and Elena, going over the recipes the same way a teacher reviews a lesson. James worked the stove with a steady focus, timing every batch. Elena tested the batter until the hush puppies landed light in the oil and came up crisp. Evenings I sat with a notepad listing what was ready, documentation, people, timing, and what still needed care. I kept my phone face down unless it was Caroline or Mr. Jenkins. Meanwhile, word about Hollis Seafood House started to travel across Charleston the way news always does. Quiet at first, then loud enough to echo. A hostess from a neighboring restaurant told me that one of my servers had quit mid-shift after David yelled in front of customers. A former line cook left me a voicemail. "Miss Maggie, the walk-in's running warm." I told them to call maintenance, but Claire said it costs too much. He sounded tired. I saved the message and didn't respond. Not yet. By midweek, Mr. Hawkins, my old shrimp supplier, called me too. Maggie, he said, I hate to bother you. Your boy asked for a double order for the weekend, but the account's 2 invoices behind. I can't load the boat till somebody pays. You follow your policy, I told him. Don't put yourself in a bind over us. He paused. Over them, you mean? I mean what I said. We ended the call with respect and tact. He'd supplied me for years because we paid on time and treated him like a partner. That was changing now and people noticed. The first bad reviews appeared online that weekend. A neighbor printed them and left them under my doormat the way folks leave a casserole. Gently, like a kindness. Overcooked crab, long waits, and management arguing by the bar. Another, used to be the best spot on the waterfront. Now it feels like nobody's steering. I didn't read more than a few lines. I didn't need to. The pattern was clear. Debt started knocking too. A letter arrived addressed to Hollis Seafood House, attention, owner, which still meant me on paper. It referenced the business loan Mark had crowed about. Past due glared across the top. I placed the envelope in a folder for Caroline and sent her a photo. She replied within minutes. Documented. Don't engage. We'll handle it. Staff turnover picked up pace. Lydia, a server who had been with me since her college days, texted Ms. Maggie, I love you but I can't do this anymore. They cut shifts, blamed tips, and changed the schedule 3 times in a day. I'm sorry. I wrote back one sentence. You have nothing to be sorry about. Then I set the phone down and waited for the sting in my chest to pass. On the 3rd Tuesday, the health inspector stopped by the restaurant. I learned that from a busboy who still checked on me. He told me the cooler logged temperatures well above safe range and a sanitizer bucket didn't test right. A routine visit turned into a citation. Nothing dramatic, no shutdown, but enough to scare weekday regulars. I pictured the clipboard, the thermometer, the face that shows no anger and no pity, just a list of standards. Standards I taught my children, standards they brushed aside. That same week, Claire called for the first time since the ambush. I let it go to voicemail. Mom, she said, voice rigid, we're having some operational hiccups. I thought maybe you could come in a few hours here and there, as a consultant. We'll pay you hourly. It'll look good for everybody. I listened twice to be sure I heard what I heard. An offer to return on their terms, to validate what they did by dressing me up as help for hire. I deleted the message. Then I wrote the date and summary in my notebook under a line that read, keep silence. Keep records. Keep steady. David texted late 2 nights in a row. Mom, where are the vendor codes for the seafood distributor? And how do you reset the POS when it freezes? I didn't answer. He had told me to go home and rest. I let his instructions stand. James and Elena ladled gumbo in my kitchen while my phone buzzed on the counter. We worked through every step they'd need. Stock rotation, allergen labeling, how to greet a table on a packed Friday without losing your breath. Mark tried a different tactic. He cornered Mr. Jenkins in the parking lot, pitching a redevelopment idea. We could flip the concept, he said, put in a raw bar, craft cocktails, neon, Instagram stuff. Mr. Jenkins called me after. He doesn't understand waterfront leases, he said. He also doesn't understand me. The lease stands as written. Your signature is the gate. Thank you, I said. We didn't need more words. Every step they took without respect bent back on them. Vendors demanded deposits. The linen service switched to weekly because bills lagged. The line cook who knew the Friars' quirks found a job across town where the schedule came out a week early and the pay arrived on time. Customers who used to wave at me from the door started walking by without stopping. They weren't cruel, they were practical. They had families to feed too. Through it all, I did the same 3 things. Prepared, watched, and waited. Caroline filed what needed filing. I practiced menus with James and Elena until the kitchen clock ticked past midnight. I drove past the restaurant from time to time. Once I pulled into the far corner of the lot and counted cars. 9 on a Saturday when we used to have 27 by 7 o'clock. Another evening, I saw David at the hostess stand, rubbing his temples while Claire scrolled through spreadsheets on a tablet. They had wanted the title. Now they had the shift that never ends. One afternoon, Caroline called with a measured kind of satisfaction in her voice. "We're ready," she said. "The filings are in place. The notices are prepared. We can request immediate enforcement if they keep operating under your name." "Then we'll choose the right day," I said. "Holiday weekend?" she asked. "Maximum visibility, minimal confusion for our side." "Holiday weekend," I agreed. People would be out with families. Our regulars would be nearby. Staff who still cared would hear the truth without whispers. That night I took the folder from my desk. License copies, recipe registrations, lease clauses, a list of staff who had stayed loyal or left clean, and placed it by the door. I set 2 aprons on the chair for James and Elena. I called Mr. Jenkins to confirm the time and Caroline to confirm the plan. Then I turned off the kitchen light and stood a long moment in the quiet. The pressure wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to the people who had brought it on themselves. The dining room I once loved looked like a boat taking on water. Not because a storm had struck, but because no one kept watch. I didn't raise my voice, didn't rush the end. I held my silence like a shield and let the facts do the work. When I finally lay down, I slept through the night for the first time in weeks. In the morning, I laced my shoes, tied my hair back, and brewed coffee. The day of the reveal was close now. All I had to do was walk through the front door and tell the truth. The rest would follow. The holiday weekend arrived with the kind of sun that made the harbor glisten like glass. Families strolled the waterfront in wide-brimmed hats, children pointing at the shrimp boats. It was the perfect Charleston Saturday, the kind that used to pack Hollis Seafood House from open to close. I drove into the lot just before noon, my folder of documents tucked neatly in my bag. Beside me in his pickup was Mr. Jenkins, steady as always, his cane tapping the pavement as we walked. Behind us, Caroline Ruiz carried her briefcase, crisp in her blazer, every step measured. And just a step behind, wearing clean aprons and standing tall, were James and Elena, the future I had chosen. The restaurant doors swung open and the sound of chaos spilled out. A hostess was arguing with a couple about their reservation. The bar was half empty, tables waiting on food, and I could hear raised voices from the kitchen. I took a deep breath and walked inside. It didn't take long for David to spot me. His face turned red, his jaw tight. "Mom," he barked, striding toward me. "You can't just walk in here. We told you." "Sit down, David," I said, my voice calm but carrying weight. The staff froze. Forks hovered midair, servers stopped mid-stride. All eyes turned to us. Claire emerged from the office, tablet in hand, Mark trailing behind her. She frowned when she saw the group behind me. "What is this?" she demanded. "This," I said, pulling the folder from my bag, "is the truth." I opened it carefully, laying out each document on the hostess stand as though I were setting the table for supper. The business license, the recipe copyrights, the dock lease, all signed by me, all still in my name. Caroline placed additional papers beside them, stamped and dated. The cease and desist, the filings that confirmed my children had no legal right to operate under my name. Caroline cleared her throat. "Mrs. Hollis remains the sole owner and license holder of this establishment. Any attempt to operate under the Hollis Seafood name without her permission is unlawful. Effective immediately, you are to cease management duties." Gasps rippled through the staff. A line cook muttered, "I knew it," under his breath. The waitress who had once cried in the corner covered her mouth with both hands. David slammed his palm on the counter. "This is ridiculous. We've been running the place for weeks. Everyone knows we're in charge now." I looked him in the eye. "No, son. Everyone knows you've been pretending. But today the pretending stops." Claire's face went pale. She turned to Mark, but he only shifted uncomfortably, his confidence cracking under Caroline's sharp gaze. Mr. Jenkins stepped forward, his cane striking the floor with authority. "And as for the lease," he said, The property still belongs under Mrs. Hollis's consent. None of you have it. Which means if she says you're out, you're out. Silence fell over the dining room. I let it linger for a moment, then took a deep breath. David, Claire, you are both terminated effective immediately. You no longer have keys, titles, or authority here. Their mouths opened, ready to argue, but I raised my hand. Enough. You used my signature when I was vulnerable. You drained accounts that weren't yours. You humiliated me in front of my staff, my customers, my community. This business was never your right. It was my gift. And you squandered it. I turned to the staff, my voice steady. But Hollis Seafood House isn't closing. Not today, not ever. Allow me to introduce your new leadership. James stepped forward, tall and calm. I'm James. I'll be running the kitchen from here on. Elena followed, smiling warmly. I'm Elena. I'll head the bakery and desserts. There was a beat of silence, then applause. It started with the waitress who had once wept in the corner, then spread to the cooks, the bartenders, even some of the customers who had been sitting stunned. The sound filled the room, loud and alive. David's face twisted with rage. You're giving our jobs to strangers? He shouted. Yes, I said simply. Strangers who earn them. Strangers who respect me. Strangers who understand loyalty. Claire's voice cracked. Mom, you can't do this. We're family. I met her eyes, steady but sorrowful. Family is supposed to lift you up, not cut you down. You made your choice. Now I've made mine. Mark tried to argue, waving his hands, muttering about legal options, but Caroline shut him down with one sharp line. You're welcome to challenge this in court, but I assure you you'll lose. The staff parted as if a tide had shifted. For the first time in weeks, the restaurant felt like mine again. Not because of the papers on the counter, but because the people inside believed it. I gathered the documents, slipped them back into the folder, and looked at my children one last time. You thought I built this for you. I didn't. I built it for the people who honor it. And that's who will carry it forward. With that, I handed James and Elena their aprons. Get to work, I said softly. We've got a full house. The applause still echoed in the dining room when the shock began to wear off. That's when the storm broke. David was the first to erupt. He shoved the clipboard off the counter so hard it clattered to the floor. This is insane, he shouted, his voice raw. You can't just waltz in here and fire us like some waitress who forgot to clock in. I've been running this place for weeks. I faced him squarely, running it into the ground. His cheeks flushed red, and for a moment I thought he might strike the counter again. Instead, he turned to the staff, his hands shaking. Don't you see what she's doing? She's throwing away her own blood for strangers. She's humiliating us in front of all of you. A cook near the kitchen door muttered, You did that yourselves. The words hung in the air like smoke. Claire's eyes welled with tears. She stepped forward, her voice trembling but sharp. Mom, you don't understand how hard we've worked. We've been carrying this place while you've been resting. Resting. I repeated. My voice stayed calm, but every syllable landed like a nail. Claire, I built this restaurant brick by brick, recipe by recipe. While you skimmed the books, I was mopping the floors. While you cut corners, I was keeping the doors open. Don't you dare stand there and tell me I was resting. Her lip quivered. I only took what I thought I deserved. After all those years helping you. You didn't help me, I said firmly. You helped yourself. And you forgot who handed you the opportunity in the first place. Mark tried to step in, raising his hands like a referee. Now hold on, Maggie. We all know family disagreements can get messy. But let's be realistic. You can't just throw them out. Courts won't see it your way forever. Caroline slid a paper across the counter toward him. They already have. Every legal body recognizes Mrs. Hollis as the sole owner. You have no authority here. If you'd like to test it, go ahead. But you'll be paying our legal fees when you lose. Mark's smirk faltered. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing more. David turned back to me, his voice breaking now, anger giving way to desperation. So that's it? After everything, you're just cutting us off? You'd rather hand our future to complete strangers? Yes, I said simply. Because strangers can be loyal. Strangers can be respectful. Strangers can see me as more than a burden. The room was silent except for the sizzle from the kitchen where James had started prepping quietly, unfazed by the drama. Elena was arranging her utensils on a side counter, her movements deliberate, her face calm. They weren't shaken. They weren't caught in the storm. They were already working. David followed my gaze and scoffed. Them? You're betting on them? They'll never love this place the way we do. I shook my head slowly. Love isn't enough. Loyalty matters more. And you showed me neither. Claire's tears spilled over. Mom, please. We made mistakes, but we can fix this. We're still your children. I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only she could hear. You are my children. That will never change. But blood doesn't erase betrayal. Trust has to be rebuilt, and that doesn't happen by pretending none of this occurred. She swallowed hard, her eyes darting between me and the staff who were watching. She wanted me to soften, to give her a lifeline right there. But I couldn't, not now, not yet. Family is supposed to lift you up, I said, my voice rising so everyone could hear, not cut you down. You cut me down in front of my staff, in front of this whole community. And today I'm standing back up without your help. The staff nodded, murmurs of agreement spreading like ripples across the room. A busboy clapped softly once before catching himself, but the sound was enough to tip the weight. The tide had turned and everyone knew it. David slammed his fist on the counter one last time, then stormed out the door, the bell above it jangling wildly as it swung shut. Mark followed, muttering curses under his breath. Claire lingered a moment longer, tears streaking her face. She opened her mouth as if to say more, but the words never came. Finally, she lowered her head and walked out quietly. The door closed and the dining room exhaled. Conversations started again, plates clinked, and for the first time in weeks, the air felt lighter. I gathered the documents back into my folder and looked around the room. The staff was still watching me, waiting. I smiled gently. All right, everyone. Let's get back to work. We've got customers waiting. James called out from the kitchen. First batch of shrimp coming up. Elena raised her hand from the counter. And hush puppies right behind. A cheer rose up, small but strong, and in that moment I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. My children had tried to take everything from me. But standing there, surrounded by people who had chosen loyalty over blood, I realized they hadn't taken the most important thing, my dignity. The very next morning I woke earlier than usual. The sunlight through the curtains felt different. Lighter somehow, as though the house itself knew a weight had lifted. I brewed coffee, tied my hair back, and slipped on an apron. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't afraid of what waited for me at Hollis Seafood House. When I arrived, the staff was already buzzing. James stood at the grill, calm and steady, humming to himself as shrimp sizzled in butter. Elena had trays of pastries cooling by the counter, the air sweet with cinnamon. The hostess greeted me with a smile so wide it nearly broke her face. "It feels good in here again, Mrs. Hollis," she said softly. I nodded. "It does." We worked together that day without hesitation. Orders moved smoothly, the line flowed, and laughter drifted from the kitchen to the dining room. It wasn't perfect. James was still learning our exact seasoning blends, and Elena fussed over portion sizes. But the staff respected them. And more importantly, they respected me. But outside those walls, my children still lingered like shadows. That afternoon, Claire showed up. She didn't march in with a tablet or bark orders this time. She slipped in quietly, wearing jeans and a faded sweatshirt, her eyes rimmed with red. She found me near the office and stopped short, wringing her hands. "Mom," she whispered. "I'm sorry." I looked at her for a long moment. "Are you sorry for what you did, or sorry that it didn't work?" Her lips trembled. "For what I did. I let Mark talk me into things I shouldn't have. I thought we could handle it, but I see now we were wrong. I folded my arms, not out of anger, but out of self-preservation. You betrayed me, Claire. You signed papers behind my back. You drained accounts. You laughed when I asked questions. That doesn't go away with one apology. Tears welled again and she nodded. I know. I don't expect you to forgive me right now. I want a chance to prove myself again. I sighed, the weight of her words pressing on me. A part of me longed to open my arms and tell her all was forgiven. But another part, the part that remembered the humiliation, the pain, the empty bank account, knew better. You'll have to prove it outside these walls, I said firmly. You're not welcome to work here right now. If you want to rebuild trust, you'll have to show me with your life, not just your words. She lowered her head, nodding slowly. All right. I'll try. She left without argument, and for the first time, I saw a glimmer of humility in her. Fragile but real. David was another story. He didn't come by the restaurant, but I heard about him through whispers, angry outbursts at bars, blaming me for ruining his career. A former staff member said he'd tried to poach them for some half-baked plan to open his own place, but no one followed. He was too bitter, too reckless. David didn't want to build, he wanted to take. And when he couldn't take from me, he flailed in the dark. I thought about him often at night, lying awake in bed. I still loved him, he was my son after all, but love doesn't blind you once you've been cut. I knew he needed time, maybe years, before he'd even begin to see what he'd thrown away. So I focused on what was in front of me. With James and Elena, I started laying down a new foundation. We set up weekly staff meetings where everyone's voice was heard. We drafted plans for seasonal menus that honored tradition but welcomed new ideas. I talked to Caroline about starting an employee profit share program, something I had always dreamed of but never implemented. If we're rebuilding, I told her, we'll rebuild with fairness at the heart. The community noticed too. Old regulars returned, smiling when they saw me at the register. One man slapped the counter and said, "Good to see you back where you belong, Maggie." Families filled the booths, and tourists left with stories about the grandmother who saved her restaurant. And though the business thrived, I set boundaries that stretched beyond the walls. No late-night calls from Claire begging to come back. No secret meetings with David. If they wanted to be part of my life again, it would be on my terms. Slow, cautious, and earned. I thought back to that moment in the dining room when I'd fired them. Their faces pale with shock, their voices desperate. It hadn't been easy, but it was necessary. And now, seeing the restaurant alive again, I knew I had done the right thing. Because family may share your blood, but loyalty is what shares your future. It's been several months since that holiday weekend, and Hollis Seafood House has settled into a new rhythm. When I step into the dining room now, the clatter of dishes and the chatter of voices don't sting the way they once did. They comfort me. The hum of a busy restaurant, steady and alive, is proof that what I fought for was worth it. James has found his stride in the kitchen. He runs it like clockwork. Orders called out, pans hitting the stove, staff moving as one. He's firm but fair, the kind of leader who earns respect without raising his voice. Elena has made the bakery corner her own. Her pecan pies and cinnamon rolls draw lines down the block on Sunday mornings. Folks come just for her pastries, and I couldn't be prouder. Me. I still work. I still wipe down counters, still check invoices, still taste the gumbo to make sure the seasoning is right. But I do it differently now. I don't carry the weight alone anymore. I let the new team take the reins where they can, and I guide them where they need it. For the first time in decades, I feel both useful and free. The community noticed the change. Our regulars, the fishermen, the families that had stopped coming, all of them returned. I can't walk down the street without someone patting my arm and saying, "Good to see you back, Maggie." Even the city paper wrote a little article about the grandmother who reclaimed her restaurant. It was humbling but also healing. As for my children, things are complicated. David hasn't spoken to me since the day he stormed out. I hear about him through others, bartenders, old co-workers, whispers from around town. He's angry, still blaming me for what happened, blind to the fact that it was his choices that brought him down. I love him, I always will, but I can't save him from himself. Not this time. Claire is different. She comes by sometimes not to work but to sit quietly at a booth. She orders coffee and pie, stays an hour, then leaves. Once in a while she lingers after closing and we talk. Nothing deep yet, just small things like the weather or her garden. But the conversations are gentle, and in her eyes, I see a flicker of regret. Maybe one day she'll rebuild the bridge she burned. For now I let her try. Do I wish things had turned out differently? Of course. No mother dreams of standing in her own business and firing her own children. No mother wants to watch her son drown in pride or see her daughter cry from shame. But I've learned something. Wishing doesn't change reality. Strength does. Boundaries do. When I look back on it all, the betrayal, the humiliation, the sleepless nights, I realize I could have given in. I could have walked away. I could have let them take everything I built. But I didn't. I found the strength to stand back up, and in doing so I found myself again. I used to think inheritance was about blood. About handing down keys and titles because of family ties. But I've learned that inheritance is really about trust. About loyalty. About giving your legacy to those who will honor it, not exploit it. My children thought the restaurant was their birthright. They were wrong. It was a gift. And gifts can be taken back when they're abused. Now when I stand in the dining room and watch the staff work together, when I smell hush puppies frying and hear laughter bouncing off the walls, I know I made the right choice. I didn't just save a restaurant. I saved my dignity, my peace, and the future of what I built. And that is worth more than any false loyalty ever could be. So if you take anything from my story, let it be this. Family may share your blood, but only loyalty shares your future. Don't be afraid to draw the line when those you love cross it. Sometimes the greatest act of love, for yourself and even for them, is refusing to let betrayal have the last word. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.